good afternoon, ACSA members. Even though we can't see you, I know you could see us. We appreciate you being out there. We see your names, and we always look forward to seeing your questions and your comments. And thank you for those of you that have joined us here as we've done this exercise over the last couple budget releases, both the January budget and the May revise. And let me introduce myself. I'm sorry, Edgar Sassueta. I'm Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations here at ACSA. And we like to joke here, you know, as we've done in previous instances, we're all drinking out of fire hoses, especially you folks, especially when the budget comes out. There's so much information coming out. And while there's still a lot of analysis to be done and things that we need to dig into, we get access to some early briefings with the Department of Finance and other key stakeholders here in Sacramento. We've taken the perspective of, even while we might not have every answer for you yet, it's better to give you some preliminary facts, figures, analysis, and also with some of our friends, right? We have a lot of answers. We have a lot of expertise here at ACSA, and I'll introduce folks here in just one second. But we also like to invite some of our friends along, namely from Leilani Aguinaldo from School Services, Barrett Snyder from Capital Advisors. And I guess how this goes is, you know, we try to do it here on the spot. Hopefully we get all the facts straight. They'll do their fancy version of their workshops here over the next week or two. But we want to give you kind of the quick and dirty analysis here this afternoon, but we appreciate both of them being on board. Let me introduce our team at ACSA, and I'll go down just to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody. Running point, you'll hear from him in just one second. Ivan Carrillo, who's our head person on budget, is going to lead us through the introductory slides, kind of setting the context. Laura Preston, one of our advocates, Diana Vu, and our newest advocate, Saret Kaminsky, who you will hear from if you haven't got to see her in action just yet. And then we have a number of other folks on team. Jason Henderson, who's also helping us with some analysis. You'll hear from him on a couple of the slides. And we have a great support team with Suzanne Caffrey, Christian Chamorian, who's making this all work for us. And we couldn't do this virtually if it wasn't for help of our IT team, and Josh Peterson, who's helping us work through that. We will make slides available. Christy will answer that. I'm sure we'll get that question. A little bit of just the logistics, how we're going to try to make this work. We're going to keep it to an hour, so we're going to try to make the most of that. Please use the Q&A for formal questions. I know some of you are going to throw stuff in the chat, and that's fine too. This serves two purposes today. One, to try to get you information, but you're not a shy group. So I know in the perspectives and the questions you're asking, we're going to get some sense about how you feel about all of these proposals. So please don't be shy there. Let us know. We will be doing a couple things. We'll be answering some of the questions live after some preliminary comments. And then one of the reasons we have a full team here is to try to be answering as much virtually as possible as well there in the Q&A. I'll let Yvonne set most of the context. I will say, obviously, this is a very different budget than where we had a year ago at this time with the May revise. As I've been saying all day, and we've been saying over the last couple of weeks, it's a far cry from the battles we were having in terms of the significant cuts that were proposed. Obviously, the state is in a different position, both with the health situation, with what the revenue picture is, but that doesn't mean that doesn't come with some challenges, right? And I know as we say, no matter how positive the budget is, we're going to find things that we don't like with it, and you'll hear a little bit of that input, that feedback, and some of this. The big caveat is this is a work in progress. This is the governor's proposal, and I think most of you that join us now are veterans in this game. That the governor proposes it. The May revise here over the next couple weeks, the legislature will have their turn to try to shape this proposal. They'll come to some compromise and move that forward. So aside from giving you information, there may be instances here over the next couple of weeks where we're going to ask our ACSA members to really help with the policymaking process in terms of really pushing and letting your perspectives be known. So with that said, I'm going to hand it to Yvonne to get us started and to jump into the presentation.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Edgar said, we're going to try to provide you as much detail as we have, but We will know much greater detail tonight when trailer bill language is released and we're able to dig into the detailed proposals that have been put forth by the governor. But just building off of what Edgar said, we've seen a historic size surplus, $76 billion. And so you see there just the growth in projected 98. And over the 3 years that make up the budget proposal, it represents nearly an $18 billion in growth than what was proposed back in January by the governor. So significant growth and opportunity to make some really meaningful investments. Before we get into it, I think what you'll start to see as we dig into some of these details is that there is some higher level alignment, certainly with ACSA priorities and the things that each of you have been talking about as being necessary. Increase in discretionary funds and the need for an inflated COLA, investments in mental health, just to name a couple. So we can go to the next slide, please. So starting off with the cost of living adjustment. So the COLA that is being put forth in the May revision is a 5.07% for the local control funding formula. So this represents a compounded amount. So it includes 1.7% for the budget year. That's the increase from 1.5% that was put forth back in January. So again, it's 1.7% in the current year. Added onto that is 2.31% for 2021. And that wasn't funded in last year's budget. And then the governor is supplementing that with an additional 1% to bring you to a total of 5.07% for the LCFF. The compounded amount for 2021 and 21-22 will be applied for special ed. And it should be noted that that's the only non-LCFF categorical that is being proposed to receive the 4.07% COLA amount. We've been advocating all along and will continue to advocate that the compounded COLA be applied across the board to all K-12 categoricals, including adult education. So please know that will certainly be part of our advocacy priorities. Next slide, please. So this is probably more information than is needed on this, but there is an investment into the Prop 98 rainy day fund of $4.6 billion. And what's important about this piece is that it exceeds the threshold that is necessary to trigger the school district reserves cap. And so the reserve cap goes into effect in the following year. So beginning 22-23, there will be a cap of 10% on local school district reserves, and that should be prepared for because it's well above the 3% threshold that's necessary to trigger that. Before, we can just keep it here for a second, and because I don't think we have slides on a couple of these other pieces, but a couple of things I wanted to talk about as well is that notably, there is not any additional relief that is being proposed for STRS and PERS in terms of employer contribution rates. So there still is some relief that will be felt through this year based on prior year buy downs, but there's no additional proposal for STRS and PERS relief. In addition to that, actually, let me hand it over to Leilani to talk about deferrals as well, please.
Great, thanks, Yvonne. So with all of the money that's coming to K-12 education, to public education, I think one of the surprises that we're still digesting is that the governor is not proposing to completely pay off the deferrals. As proposed in the May revision, $2.6 billion of deferrals would remain. So as a reminder, because I know we went through all of this rigmarole of how this all mechanically gets implemented, what this means is that the June 2022 deferral will amount to $2.6 billion. that will be deferred from June 2022 to July 2023, because the existing deferrals for the 2021 fiscal year, those are going in place as current law, right? And so this is the ongoing deferral for June 2022 to July 2023. He's proposing to keep that portion. It's not the entire amount of June that will be deferred. It would be, at this point, with the additional May revision proposal to buy down an additional 1.1 billion of the deferral, we will be left with an ongoing $2.6 billion deferral that will remain in June of 2022. Hopefully I explained that okay, and if I didn't, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions in the Q&A. Thanks, Yvonne.
Thanks, Leilani. So we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Saret, on this piece.
Thanks, Yvonne. So regarding community schools, I just want to start at the top to be clear that we're talking about community schools as sites that blend integrated health, mental health, and social services alongside high quality supportive instruction. And it's intended that these community schools will also offer expanded learning time, active family and community engagement, and collaborative leadership and practices. So the proposal is for $3 billion that's available over several years. And this level of proposed funding would support grants for up to 1,400 LEAs, which is more than 60% of the LEAs statewide. And that would be to convert school campuses into full service community schools. Thanks. Next slide.
So in terms of accelerated learning, the governor is proposing additional funds that will act in a similar manner to the funds that went out back in April per AB 86, specifically the expanded learning opportunities grant dollars. And so the governor has been describing this as high dose tutoring. That's how he pitched it yesterday, and I'm sorry, this morning in his press conference, as well as earlier this week when he talked specifically about K-12. So we were just in a briefing with the Department of Finance and had asked them for some specifics, and they wouldn't give us any other than saying that it will go out in a similar manner to how the funding went out with the expanded learning opportunities grants. And so that would be in proportion to your LCFF funding amounts. What we don't know is if there'll be additional dollars provided for each homeless youth, as was done in the expanded learning opportunities grants funding. They did say that there will be a broad allowable uses in terms of how this $2.6 billion would be utilized, but that research-based intensive tutoring would be a focus that's called out.
So in terms of transforming youth mental health, Governor Newsom has long championed the mental health of our youth. This time around, he's proposing $4 billion over 5 years to identify treatment and behavioral health issues for ages up to 25. So the ages 0 to 25. This investment is integral in transforming the processes of screening, diagnosing, and then treating for all persons in this age group. Additionally, the Mental Health Services Act Partnership Grant Program includes $30 million in one-time mental health services funds to build up those partnerships between LEAs, districts, and county behavioral health, which are all designed to support student mental health services.
So there's a proposal to provide $2 billion to schools that would add greater emphasis in terms of preparing schools to reopen safely. And so you'll see what's being called out, at least in the summary, and how it's being described in terms of testing and vaccine initiatives, cleaning supplies, PPE, ventilation. This was, again, we don't know how this is going to go out to schools, unfortunately, at the moment, whether or not it'll be, I mean, they said again that it'll be complementary to AB 86 and the in-person instruction grants dollars that went out. but we don't know if they'll be in proportion to your LCFF, district's LCFF funding amount. We also don't know the spending deadlines on this. I imagine there'd be some emphasis on the short term, just given that it's focused on health and safety and facility pieces. But we'll be looking out for details on that. But there is additional dollars for PPE and safety mechanisms.
So in regards to workforce prep, retention, and training, you'll see that there is quite a bit of money that has been proposed here, $3.3 billion for some of the programs that I'll highlight in a minute. But you'll see a number of these are familiar to you. Teacher residencies, the proposal is to support approximately 22,000 teacher candidates in teacher residencies, and in other grow your own teacher credentialing programs, and that would be a total of $550 million over 5 years. The Golden State Teacher Grants would be a total of $500 million over 5 years, and this would support a combined total of at least 25,000 grants for teacher credential candidates who commit to teach in a priority school in a high needs subject matter area for 4 years. A very highly acclaimed program is the Classified School Employee Teaching Credential Program. That would be a total of $125 million, and that would be funded over 5 years to support more than 5,000 classified school staff to become credentialed teachers. Next slide, please. And the roadmap to pre-K through 12 educational employment program is a combined $65.5 million one-time Prop 98 and $45.6 million one-time general fund to establish this roadmap. And that would be a long-term comprehensive statewide recruitment and communication strategy that focuses on recruiting and developing a diverse and talented educational workforce. So it'll be interesting when we get more details with the trailer bill language so we can really digest that. There's also been money proposed for credential fee waivers. That would be $20 million in one-time general fund, and that would help for individuals that enter the K-12 educator workforce. And there's also funding proposed for the computer science teacher recruitment. That's $15 million for over 3 years to support 6,000 teachers that would complete coursework necessary to receive state certification to teach computer science. Next slide, please. And then on the retention and training side, we have the proposed educator effectiveness block grant would be a total of $1.5 billion, and that would be to provide LEAs with training resources for classified, certificated, and administrative school staff in specified high needs topics, including accelerating learning, re-engaging students, restorative practices, and implicit bias training. We also have incentives for 2,500 highly qualified national board certified teachers that would teach in high poverty schools, and that's to attract and retain them as mentors for other instructional staff. And then there's also $60 million proposed in one-time Prop 98 funding for the Classified School Employee Summer Assistance Program, which would provide matching funds for intersessional pay for classified employees that work less than 12 months per year. And then we also have the 21st Century School Leadership Academy. I think that's on the next slide, which would be $25 million one-time Prop 98 over 5 years to provide high quality professional learning for administrators and other school leaders. And then there would be additional one-time funds also provided to increase educator training and resources in early math, reading, science instruction, computer science, dyslexia, and LGBTQ+ cultural competency. And finally, there's also going to be some language that proposes aligning teacher prep programs with new expectations for the instruction of students with exceptional needs, including dyslexia. Next slide.
Right. So, TK, the May revise proposes universal access to transitional kindergarten starting from 2022-23 and fully implemented by 24-25. Universal TK will be phased in by increments of 3 months of age per year until all 4-year-olds are eligible by 2024-25. The first year, 2021-22, is a freebie. LEAs will be able to use it for planning and infrastructure development purposes. As for funding, $900 million from the general fund will be provided for 2022-23. This will grow to $2.7 billion in 24-25. At this point, Proposition 98 will be rebenched to accommodate TK as an official ongoing grade. In addition, the May revise repurposes the $250 million one-time Prop 98 general fund originally intended to incentivize TK expansion to now being used for planning and implementation grants for all LEAs. Next slide, please. So part of the funding allocated have specific intentions. The $380 million in 2022-23 will be used to support and enhance the quality of existing TK programs. The $740 million in 2024-25 is supposed to provide one additional certificate or classified staff person in each TK classroom, thereby reducing the adult-to-student ratios in many classrooms from 1:24 to 1:12. Next slide, please. Lastly, the May revise maintains the level of funding available for the state preschool program. The administration will develop a plan for the implementation in 2022-23 to support existing state preschool program providers in serving younger children and ensuring all eligible 3-year-olds have access. Next slide, please. So now we're on to expanded learning time. The May revise proposes a 5-year plan to implement expanded day full-year instruction and enrichment for all elementary school students in LEAs with the highest concentrations of low-income students, ELs, and foster youth. These programs are meant to be similar to ACES programs and will offer developmentally appropriate enrichment to students. In addition, these programs will require an adult-to-student ratio of 1:10 for TK and kindergarten students and 1:20 for 1st to 6th graders. Next slide, please. The May revise proposes to use Prop 98 General Fund $1 billion in 2021-22, growing to $5 billion in 25-26. Over the implementation period, services will be phased in and LEAs will have, with the highest proportions of students with low-income families, EL, foster youth will have access first. Once fully implemented, the administration proposes incorporating these funds into LCFF as concentration grant calculations. Thank you. Next slide.
Sorry, I was trying to type an answer to the question in the chat box. But in terms of virtual learning, so what the governor does make instruction will be the default delivery mode this school year. So the provisions that we saw related to distance learning this past year will expire at the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, and will revert back to in-person instruction, again, being the default delivery option. So what the governor has pointed out in terms of being the virtual option for families, that independent study will be used as the model. That statute will guide the options that can be designed locally by LEAs. And there are some modifications to independent study that the governor is proposing. Again, we just have high-level summary, but it addresses the issues that you see in front of you in terms of technology access, improving quality, and trying to increase student engagement. But school services and Leilani have done a really deep dive in terms of independent study and what it provides for and allows for. So let me ask Leilani to add in on this piece.
Thanks, Yvonne. So yeah, I think the eight pages for the May revision just really reinforces the notion that for the 21-22 school year, we have two opportunities, two different modes of instruction in order to generate apportionment funding, right? And so the primary mode is expected to be in-person instruction, as Yvonne summarized. That is where the momentum has been. these last few months, and that's where the momentum and the desire at the state level continues, is that these our students, the majority of our students will be served through in-person instruction, returning to pre-pandemic thinking of how instruction was delivered, but recognizing that there are some families that still would like to utilize non-classroom based instruction. The 8 pages points us to existing independent study statutes that really the distance learning, 100% distance learning, again, we are not talking about hybrid, but that 100% distance learning models that, some students did, find as an optimal way of learning for them, that districts will be able to continue serving those students who aren't comfortable returning in person. Those students can be served using the independent study model. 100% distance learning can be delivered using the existing independent study statutes. And the 8 pages really reinforces that for us. But noting, and this is, speaking to conversations I've had with a few of you over the last few weeks about independent study statutes, really wanting to ensure high quality instruction for those students that are relying on non-classroom based instruction. And that's what we'll be waiting for the trailer bill language, is what those amendments to existing statute will call for as far as access to technology, high quality, ensuring student engagement. Those details will be yet to be found in the trailer bill language, but really reinforcing also for all of us that those of us that have been worried about planning for 21-22, you can go forward with that planning using existing independent study and course-based independent study statutes.
Yeah, I'll just, if I can jump in on this one a little bit. Leilani's right. We don't have the actual language in the trailer bill yet, and that'll be really informative about what this actually means. But just a quick cursory look at what they're asking for. They're asking for, and this is going to be problematic for folks if you've already negotiated and set a master calendar schedule for next year. And I know Senator Laird, who's the chair of the budget subcommittee on the Senate side, is watching this issue pretty closely. The idea that you're going to have to check in every day with pupils that are enrolled in independent study is going to be a major problem, I think, in places. This is a little late. We tried to talk to the administration about this prior to the revision coming out. We were sort of hoping this wouldn't end up in here. But these are looking like fairly significant changes if you've already planned and negotiated. If you've got a teacher that has 40 kids and they got to talk to each one of them every single day in order to meet a condition of apportionment, that teacher's not going to be having quality contact with 40 kids every day. It's going to be check a box and move on. So I'm not sure these proposals are going to get them where they want to go. I think they're well intentioned, but I'd put a pin in this one for conversations in the legislature.
We can go to the next slide, please. Jason, I know you were digging into it.
Yeah. So a lot of the programs you heard previously, they're about a 5-year investment, but this one here really has a future outlook. So the college saving proposal is a long-term investment in children and their financial futures. And really it's a strategy to promote positive savings behavior with low-income families. So there's $2 billion that creates the California Child Savings Account Program, an initial $500 to every public school first grader who qualifies under LCFF, and then $1,000 for each foster and homeless child. Newsom launched a similar program like this when he was the mayor of San Francisco, but this is really just a larger effort to reverse extraordinary toll on 3.8 million students, low-income children that have felt it by the pandemic. There will be an influx of 170 million into the general fund from the ARP. That's the American Rescue Plan provided by President Biden. So this is really just that long-term investment into our youngest, neediest cohort.
So we certainly want to open up the opportunity to answer any questions that you all have. One other piece beforehand that I wanted to be sure to touch on is the governor is proposing $1.1 billion in ongoing funding, really focused and intent on reducing student to staff ratios, but focusing specifically on districts that have high concentration of unduplicated count pupils. And so the focus initially will be on those that have over 80 or 85% UPP counts, and then it'll be reduced over a few years to, now I'm sorry, I'm confusing, I'm conflating things. So I'm completely wrong with this. So it's actually going to be a change to the LCFF formula. And so the concentration grant add-on, the current 50%, will be increased to 65%. So there will be an additional 15% increase that is generated by concentration grant pupils. But the restriction on these funds is that there's the expectation that LEAs hire additional staff to reduce student to staffing ratios. So there's supposed to be broad flexibility in terms of whether it's certificated or classified employees, but that LEAs will have to delineate within their LCAP how they're meeting the requirements of that piece in terms of reducing the student to staff ratios.
Thanks, Yvonne. And just a trend, before we go to a couple of these questions, I think we may have, I'm going to go to Laura. There's a bit of information on special education, I think CTE and some of these ratios that may have lost a few bullets there, but Laura will go over the pertinent information.
Hi, everyone. Remember to add questions to the Q&A if you have any questions for us, and we'll try to answer them for you. For SPED, the governor, they are allocating an additional $117.7 million, Prop 98 dollars, to increase the cost of living adjustment that Yvonne talked about earlier. It's 4.07. The reason it's not 5.07 is because that 1% difference is, as was mentioned earlier, goes into the LCFF funding formula. So that's why it's that 1% lower. There's the budget also recognizes the influx of federal dollars under IDEA that have come into the state, and then allocates those dollars in a couple different ways. They have 15 million one-time federal IDE funds to provide technical assistance and support to LEAs to develop and administer comprehensive IEPs, and to develop tools and resources to assess and address academic impacts of the pandemic on our students with disabilities. 2.3 million from IDEA, with 965,000, which is just a big chunk of it is only on a one-time basis, to fund 6 more positions at the California Department of Ed to assist with special ed monitoring, and to purchase special ed monitoring software. And lastly, it's 1.2 million under, again, IDEA, of which 1.1 million is only on a one-time basis, to add 1 position to improve the coordination between the CDE and the Department of Developmental Services. And it's to really transition for the IDEA Part C to Part B. And so that transition, that person will be responsible for directing those resources. The other question that was mentioned was around CTE, and there's a lot of workforce money in the budget. And there is a piece in there that it's a 250 million one time for a K-16 collaborative to be focused on streamlining educational pathways leading to in-demand jobs. That's found in the higher education piece. And in the higher education piece also, there is a huge investment in community college training and opportunities to provide training for some of your high demand jobs, and they specify what those are. I looked at it a couple times, was hoping that there might be a piece in there for K-12, but it's pretty clear that those other resources are for community colleges.
Thanks, Laura. Before we answer a couple of the questions that we saw, and some will reiterate that we saw in writing, I was going to yield to Barrett, just big picture, aside from specific questions, just big takeaways. Now as we kind of take a step back, and then I'll give Leilani a chance to add her thoughts of just, you know, kind of the perspectives that we're gathering here, what we might expect as this goes now to the legislature. I think Barrett had a really good point about some of the dynamics around the virtual learning, but just offer just big picture takeaways for both of you.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to. There's just a lot of money here. You know, 17 and some odd change and billions of dollars change across the 3 fiscal years. Not to mention, we didn't really talk about it here, but this GAN limit dynamic, we actually don't see the money in the proposal now, but it's out in the future, about $8 billion under that. And then the question I think becomes, how do we spend those dollars? You know, there's a proposal here to essentially rebench 98 and add a grade, rethinking our after school and before and after school programs, like really sort of adding on. So that's, you know, and how you do that, I think is going to be what the legislature and the governor wrestle with. But also things like there are 2 proposals here that directly start changing the local control funding formula for the first time that I can remember, right? They're adding that 1% in on the base in the COLA. There's as Yvonne talked about it, but that's a policy shift. We're going to bump the base up by 1%. And then also Yvonne talked about the concentration grants. There are proposals here to tie portions of expenditures under the concentration grant to hiring certain staff. You know, that's a departure from local control, and I think that'll be something we want to debate. Is whether or not we want to do that. Leilani talked about, I think it was Leilani, the $2.6 billion deferral. We're sort of leaving that. And, you know, that's I think an open policy question. There's some would say there's wisdom in paying off all the deferrals, because if the out year projections are that we're going to see, you know, deficits, that, you know, we're never for a deferral, but we're for a deferral before we're for a cut. And so that would let us do that. And then, you know, the virtual, you know, the distance learning model for next year, more or less, you know, changes to independent study. I think there are some laudable efforts there to try and reform independent study in virtual learning settings. I don't know that you can do it this late. I think that's going to be just an implementation problem. There's a bill in the legislature, AB 1316, that's got a lot of these elements in it, and rethink those as a policy proposal going forward. That's probably the better place to have it. But it's here in the May revision, so now we got to deal with it. It's now a proposal on the table. So those are my initial big picture elements here.
Thanks, Barrett. Leilani, I'll give you a chance to give your thoughts as well.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, could absolutely agree with everything Barrett has said. I can't remember now if this was already mentioned from the summaries from the awesome GR team that you have, but one of the things that we've been looking for in the May revision to see if there's any funding for it, and it's not, there's no money there for it, so don't go looking for it. There's no money for STRS and PERS increases, and there's no money for the unemployment insurance rate increase, right? So putting on my hat from when I used to be, I worked for 2 different governors, so putting that hat back on, my response to that, if I worked for the governor, would be, well, that's why you're getting the extra money through the LCFF, right? But as we all know, that comes with, it's like, thank you, but because that also means that's money that's coming to us from the LCFF, but as you all know better than we do, that's also money that's on the negotiating table, right? It's different when they're giving us money as a one-time set aside, specifically earmarked for STRS and PERS and unemployment insurance rate increases, because then there's guardrails around that money. So looking forward to getting more general fund dollars through the local control funding formula, but you know, the fact that it's general fund dollars means that it's on the negotiating table, not to mention, as Barrett said, there's strings that come with that money now. That additional money for concentration grant districts, that 1.1 billion, I think that's what it was. Sorry, all these numbers are floating in my head. There's strings attached to that. And, you know, I think this year, unlike more so than any other year, we're all eagerly waiting to comb through that trailer bill language to see, okay, what do these parameters look like? What do those strings look like for what the 1.1 billion? Because I'm sure some of you are already asking, teachers don't grow on trees, right? Thank you for that 3.3 billion that Saret walked through so well, right? About the teacher pipeline and the teacher recruitment dollars and all of that. But of that 3.3 billion, we're not going to see the fruit of all of that for a number of years. And in the meantime, we're getting 1.1 billion to hire additional staff. How do those two things relate? So that's one of the things. because out of that 3.3 billion, a whopping 20 million of it will be stuff that we will be able to count on next year. And that's the $20 million to waive the credential fees in 21-22, right? So other than that 20 million, we have to wait a long time for people to graduate from school, get their credential, and then go through a residency program, right? So those are some of the details that we'll definitely be looking toward in the trailer bill. And yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to be part of today and to help share some insights.
I think one other thing
oh, go ahead, Yvonne. Go for it.
Is that the field has made it so clear to us, and there's just been so many examples of budgets, 3-year budget projections that have been shared with us, that in the out years, there are going to be some real significant fiscal challenges that districts face. And so there's an opportunity here. It's a greater opportunity to use one-time funds to provide some longer-term fiscal relief, and recognizing that these one-time funds are going to dry up in the near future. So STRS and PERS relief is just one of those examples of being able to provide some really meaningful relief to every single LEA across the state. And so that's something that will certainly be top of mind in our advocacy efforts is moving forward, is making sure that funding, the funding that's available is used in a very prudent manner to set districts up for long-term success.
Thanks, Yvonne. So we're going to go try to rapid fire here. I think we get through at least some, and there's still time to throw your question in. So we'll start at the top. This one for Yvonne. You want to touch on this community-funded district question that we saw in the chat?
I'm looking at it now, and let's see. I'm not certain on the answer. By chance, Leilani, do you know that, or Barrett?
Yeah, I can jump in with that. So Maritas, this is one where we need to look at the trailer bill language to see how this additional 2.6 billion is going to be distributed. The way it was described in the budget summary, the 2.6 billion for accelerated learning serves as a complement to the expanded learning opportunities grant. And as you know, since you're a basic aid, all basic aid districts did benefit from the 4.6 billion expanded learning opportunities grant, as well as the 2.0 billion in-person instruction grant that was part of AB 86. And that's because the distribution of those funds was in proportion to your LCFF entitlement. And so that's one of the things we'll have to comb through the trailer bill language to see if this new 2.6 billion, which is meant to supplement the expanded learning opportunities grant, as well as the additional, I believe it was 2.0 billion, that supplements the in-person instruction grant, right? There was an additional $2 billion for reopening. Hopefully all of that goes out the same methodology as the AB 86 grants in proportion to your LCFF entitlement, in which case basic aid districts would get some of that money as well.
Thanks, Leilani. Barrett, how about you taking a crack at this one? Is there any possibility that rebenching Prop 98 could negatively impact some districts? Any thoughts there?
I can't think of how that would negatively impact a district off the top of my head. What the idea is to rebench for adding the grade level in. There might be some distributional dynamics with that, but you know, you have to run some. That's a Excel spreadsheet exercise that my brain is not equipped to do at the moment.
All right, we'll come back to that. Yeah, and like I said, some of this is preliminary information, so I'm sure some of this will trickle out, as everybody has said, as once people get their heads around it. I'll start with Leilani on the independent study question, but I'm sure Barrett will have some thoughts on that as well. With independent study, any chance of having the funding cap of 10% go away?
Okay, Terry, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the funding cap of 10%. So just to be clear, there is a misconception that there is a cap of 10% on independent study, and that is a misconception. There is no 10% across the board cap for independent study. The only cap that exists for independent study is you can have no more than 10% of your continuation school or opportunity school students enrolled in independent study. Okay, so if that's what you're talking about, hopefully I've answered that question. I'm not sure. Barrett, I mean, you definitely know this more than I do. So
yeah, agreed. And sometimes some folks, they're referring to their pupil-teacher ratios, which can end up feeling like a cap locally in some instances. But the cap, I mean, one of the things that I think we're looking for from the administration is also, are they going to allow digital signatures for independent study next year? If you're a school district, you got to have kids enrolled for 5 days before you can collect attendance. We're hoping that would go away. And then county offices also need to have permission from a district to enroll them. And so we're going to be pushing on, if you're making independent study changes, there's actually some things you can do to be a little more helpful here for everybody. So, but for the continuation and opportunity schools, maybe we can lift the cap to the extent that's a problem, Terry, for you or for some of your schools. So I'll chat with you about it.
And then Terry actually had a follow-up question. So Terry asks, for follow-up, if I have 20% of my students on independent study, will I get full funding? The answer is it depends. If you're doing traditional independent study, then you'll get funding for those 20% of your students. If you have course-based IS, then you will have to apply the absence rate factor for the 10%, for the additional 10% of students, because if you only have 10% of your students in course-based IS, then you will be funded based on the enrollment of those students. Any students above that 10% for course-based IS, they apply an absence factor. And the rationale there is, for traditional schools, it's not 100% attendance. So that's where the absence rate comes in. So hopefully that answered that question, Terry.
Yvonne, a question we don't have here, but I'll start with you and then I'll let others jump in just to reset, just to not folks assume that we know what has happened, especially on some of these questions. And Barrett mentioned this in terms of planning, and some folks may already have agreements. So on the virtual learning, but then as a budget as a whole, like just reset us on what the next steps are and kind of what happens legislative process. And for those folks eager to have some final decisions on some of these issues, kind of what should the field expect as we move now into this next phase of budget deliberations?
Yeah, so we're gonna see some budget hearings here on the immediate end that will start digging into the details of this, and we'll start to give much more insight in terms of where the legislature is at, in terms of the questions that they're asking, in terms of statements that they're making. So we'll get some clarity in terms of what they support and what they have issue with, and so they have a June 15th deadline of passing the budget. So it's going to move incredibly quick over the next month. But some of these things, again, there'll be some clarity pretty soon in terms of whether or not there's support and what there's going to be issue with. So the things that they have issue with are the things that we're not going to know necessarily the answers to until much closer to that June 15th deadline, unfortunately. But some of these things that I think you'll begin to be able to expect and prepare for on an earlier end, given if we're able to assess the amount of support that's being communicated from the legislature for these different proposals.
And Martin, I'll just ask a question about your COLAs. We don't have that figure yet. Usually, I believe when DOF releases their facts and figures, sometimes it's a day of, next day, maybe on Monday, that information will be released. So just stay tuned on that. That's part of the pieces that trickle out. Laura, we didn't talk about broadband. So I'll go to you. Let's see if we still have the nice, lovely birds in your background there, or if they went away.
Busy concentrating on what I was saying. I didn't even hear them. So actually, I'm going to pass this off to Diana as she's doing. There's pieces of it that kind of cross over with both of us. I do the facilities part. She does more of the instructional materials. And I think this will go back to Diana if you want.
Sure, thanks, Laura. So the governor has prioritized broadband, and in the May revise, he proposes a $7 billion investment over 3 years as part of a plan to expand broadband infrastructure, increase affordability, and enhance access to broadband for all Californians. There's a few breakdowns of how he's going to do it as well. Gets it kind of into weedy, but like $500 million for a loan to assist local governments, $500 million to also assist the state's existing affordable telephone services program, to also include broadband services. But that's kind of it on my end. Laura, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
There's also some federal funding that just was released on May 12th for low-income families. It's not, it's at the federal level, and it's not for LEAs, but it's for your families that may be low income, where they can access money from the federal government to help pay for their internet services, which is, you know, an issue that many of your families are facing. So there is we can put a link in when we put this document up, as well as to where, if you're interested, you can direct your families to be able to go to access those funds.
I think we've answered all the questions. I'm sure more will come in here over the days to come, and just know that ACSA obviously will be putting out initial analysis with a summary of some of the pieces we talked about, and that should be out later today. Obviously, as it goes on into next week, as we get more information as some of this trailer bill language, we'll continue to get keep our folks updated. I'll give Leilani and Barrett this opportunity, representing their two organizations, kind of give some final thoughts, and then Yvonne could wrap us up from the ACSA front. Leilani, start with you.
Oh man, I wasn't ready. I think it's he definitely has a vision, right? It's a lot of money coming to California students, which is great. I mean, we need those resources, and it's you know, previous administrations would have given a lot more opportunity for local control and local decision making for how those funds are used. But this governor has definitely a vision, and I would say that a lot of this is also consistent with what he campaigns on, right? So none of this really is that much of a surprise. We knew coming into this governorship that Newsom really prioritized early learning and all of that, and it should be no surprise with our state board chair, Linda Darling-Hammond, the investment in the teacher pipeline as well. So, you know, while folks may be disappointed that there's not more discretionary funding that's available, still a lot of money coming to California, because remember, this money does not include the ESSER dollars that a lot of the districts are also getting, and that's outside of the budget, because those funds are dictated by federal law to go out 90% share to school districts. So lots of money to work with out there. Good luck.
Thanks, Leilani. Barrett?
Yeah, agreed. And you know, just stepping back, the politics of this budget are interesting with the recall. I think it's, you know, governors tend to get, you know, 90% of what they want generally in budgets with the legislature, particularly when they're from the same party. He's the leader of their party. It was not lost on, I think, any of us that when he stood up at that press conference the other day to announce what are the major spending elements here, that the two chairs of the budget committees were the ones that introduced the governor. So I think that there are lots of indications that the legislature, given the recall, are likely to go along with, I think, the broad structure that he's proposing here. There may be, you know, tweaks within the programs, some shifting here and there, but I think it's largely going to go the way he's proposing it, with some maybe some minor tweaks. So just, I think that's going to be notable here given what's going on. So, and it's going to be quick, right? I mean, this is where the pedal goes to the floor. We got 30 days between now and June 15th. This budget's got to be fully cooked. They got to send it downstairs. You know, they don't need any public fights over anything. So, you know, I don't know if you guys noticed how many names of legislators he dropped here. The chair of the Women's Caucus, the budget chairs, like, he was trying to make everybody happy. There's something for you. It's like Oprah at her show, like, there's something under your seat. There's something under your seat. Like, all right, like, feels politically like it was really well thought out from a political perspective. And I just think it's going to go largely the way it's proposed. So anyway.
Thanks, Barrett. I love that Oprah connection. That's a good one, because that's Yvonne, close us off here from ACSA perspective.
I think what I'll close with is just really emphasizing the power of your voices in this process. And we've really seen that on full display over the past year, just how much influence ACSA members have when they make their voices heard. And so while it's going to move quickly, and I know it's like one more thing to add to your plate, hoping just that you recognize that you really have the power to help influence these budgetary decisions, And so whether or not it's dropping a quick email to your legislator, or even just sending an email to us, because that informs our larger ACSA advocacy as well. Please make your voices heard on behalf of your students, and just continue to stress that there's no better advocates for students than you all in the field. And so just appreciate you engaging with us in this process and spending time with us here on a Friday late afternoon to be informed. And again, the trailer bills are coming out tonight, we were told. So come next week, we're going to have much more greater detail for you all, and to be able to answer many more questions. And so be on the lookout for continued information to come out from ACSA. I know school services and capital advisors are doing their workshops and putting a lot of information out as well. But thank you again for your time.
Thank you to our team. Thank you to Leilani and Barrett from School Services and Capital Advisors. And thank you, folks. I know some of you spend a whole day with us, and some of you in our governance meeting. Some of you tuned in the middle of the day for a lunch break, and then you're back with us here all on a Friday, all on towards the end of the year. So just appreciate all the work you folks are doing. And just know that we're here to answer questions as things come up. Let us know if we can't get the answer. We'll find somebody who does have the answer. So hope everybody has a good weekend, and we will be in touch. Thank you.